Look, something just walked off an oil rig that's been down there watching us. I'm not talking about a shark. I'm not talking about some deep sea fish we haven't cataloged yet. I'm talking about something that knew the names of the crew, that had been observing them for weeks, and that made the most unshakable diver I've ever heard of quit his job in the middle of a shift and never go near water again. Robert Kensington walked onto the deck at 2:47 p.m., dripping wet, still in his dive suit, ripped his helmet off and said 5 words, "I'm done," effective immediately. Then he flew off that rig and moved to Nevada, the furthest point from the ocean he could find in the continental United States. Now, Captain Reeves thought it was nitrogen narcosis. That's when nitrogen builds up in your blood at depth and basically gets you drunk, makes you hallucinate, think you can breathe underwater, all kinds of crazy stuff. Except Robert's gas mixture was perfect, his depth was controlled, and nitrogen narcosis doesn't explain what happened next, because 2 other divers were already missing. Nobody realized it until Robert asked where Johnson was. Johnson was the guy who'd called in sick that morning with food poisoning, the reason Robert went down solo in the first place. Except when they checked Johnson's quarters, the bed was made, the room was empty, and his dive gear was gone. Johnson hadn't been sick. Johnson had walked into the ocean, and he wasn't the first one. That's what makes this absolutely insane. When they started actually checking, really checking, they found 2 more divers missing. Peters, who was supposedly on emergency leave, except the supply boat confirmed he never boarded. 2 maintenance divers who were logged as transferred to another rig, except there were no transfer orders on file. 4 men gone in 3 months, all explained away with paperwork, and nobody noticed because nobody looked. Robert was supposed to be the 5th. The thing that came up from the trench below Sector 7, whatever it was, it had been selecting people, preparing them, working on their minds for weeks before they finally walked into the water voluntarily. And Robert only escaped because something in him resisted, some part of his brain that had seen too much death to fall for whatever this thing was broadcasting. Let me back up and tell you how this started, because the details matter here. Robert Kensington wasn't some rookie who panicked underwater. 8 years of professional diving, perfect safety record, the guy other divers measured themselves against. They called him the Ghost because nothing bothered him, ever. Completely calm, methodical, the kind of person you want next to you when things go wrong at 200 feet below the surface. The year before, he'd pulled 3 divers out of cable entanglements, saved their lives. Cable entanglement is one of the worst ways to die underwater because you're stuck, you're burning through your air supply, and panic makes it worse. Robert went down, cut them free, brought them up one by one, hero stuff, except he never talked about it, just logged the incident and moved on. So when Johnson called in sick on the morning of the dive, corporate didn't hesitate. They needed someone to inspect the pipeline in Sector 7 because there were pressure fluctuations showing up, nothing catastrophic, but enough to warrant a look. Robert was the obvious choice, the only diver on that rig they'd trust for a solo operation. Solo dives aren't ideal, you always want a buddy system, but they had a standby diver, topside, full umbilical support, communication suite, everything by the book. Robert had done this exact dive dozens of times, knew that pipeline better than the engineers who designed it. Routine inspection, 45 minutes at depth, then decompression in the chamber, simple. The conditions were perfect too, better than perfect actually. 60-foot visibility, which in that part of the ocean is like winning the lottery. Usually you're working in murk where you can barely see your own hands. Sunlight was penetrating all the way down to 180 feet. You could see amberjacks swimming around, groupers hanging near the structure, totally normal marine activity, the kind of environment where you're almost relaxed. Robert hit the water at 14:12, reached the pipeline junction at 14:27, pulled out his slate and started taking notes. Valve conditions, corrosion patterns, checking the welds, measuring pressure readings, the kind of boring technical work that keeps oil rigs from exploding. Everything textbook, everything routine, just another day at the office, except the office is 180 feet underwater. Then at 14:47, exactly 20 minutes into the inspection, every sound in the ocean stopped. Not faded, not gradually diminished, just stopped like someone had hit a mute button on the entire reef. The fish disappeared, all of them instantly, not swimming away, not scattering, just gone like they'd been erased from existence. Even the reef-anchored species that don't move, the ones that wedge themselves into crevices and wait for food to drift by, completely vanished. Divers have a rule about this, unwritten but absolutely followed. When the reef goes silent, something big is coming. Apex predator, usually a shark, sometimes a whale. Every living thing in the area decides it's time to hide or die. Robert kept working, figured it was probably a bull shark passing through, maybe a hammerhead. He'd seen them before. They generally ignore divers if you don't act like prey, don't make sudden movements, don't look vulnerable. But he scanned with his dive light anyway, checked above, below, all around, standard procedure when the environment changes. Nothing visible, absolutely nothing in any direction. But he felt it, this awareness on the back of his neck, which doesn't make sense because he's wearing a full dive suit and helmet, but he felt it anyway. Not being watched by an animal, something different, something that made his skin crawl. He described it later as being studied, examined, like a lab specimen under observation, like something was taking notes on him. His heart rate started climbing. The wrist monitor started beeping, hyperventilation warnings, respiratory rate increasing beyond normal parameters. That's when Robert decided to abort. When your body's telling you something's wrong and you can't identify the threat, you get out. Standard procedure, you notify surface support before ascending. You don't just bolt for the surface because that's how accidents happen. He reached for the comm system, checked the umbilical first, always check the physical connection before assuming equipment failure. Fully intact, hardwire, clean, power flowing through. You could see the indicator lights showing active connection, everything functioning perfectly, at least on his end, at least according to every diagnostic he could run. He keyed the mic and got absolute silence. Not static, not garbled transmission, not the usual underwater acoustics, total void, like the sound had been swallowed by something, like there was a barrier between him and the surface that audio couldn't penetrate. Tried again, nothing. The umbilical was working. He could feel tension on it, could see the lights, but somehow every sound had been cut off. Robert's training kicked in immediately. When you lose comms at depth, you begin a slow, controlled descent. You don't panic, you don't rush. You follow the protocols that have been drilled into you through thousands of hours of practice. Rushing at 180 feet is how you get decompression sickness and die. Nitrogen bubbles forming in your blood, expanding as pressure decreases. Basically, the bends killing you from the inside. But he couldn't move yet. Something was stopping him, because something was rising from the trench below the pipeline, from depths that shouldn't have anything living. A light blue-green glow, steady rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, like something breathing, coming up from somewhere the survey map said was just empty water and rock. This wasn't bioluminescence. Robert had seen plenty of that: jellyfish, certain fish species, microorganisms that light up when disturbed. This was different, intentional, controlled, like something had turned on a lamp and was bringing it directly toward him with purpose. The color was wrong too. Bioluminescence is usually blue or green, but this was both simultaneously shifting between them like it couldn't decide or didn't need to. The thing ascended fast, way too fast for anything biological, faster than any fish or mammal could move through water. But here's what freaked Robert out immediately. It wasn't creating pressure disturbance, wasn't pushing water aside. When a large object moves through water, it pushes the water aside, creates currents, turbulence. You feel it against your body. You see it in the way smaller particles move. This light was rising without displacing anything, without creating any of the normal hydrodynamic effects, like it was moving through a different substance entirely, like the water wasn't even there for it, like it existed in the same space but operated under different physical laws. Robert started his ascent, slow and controlled, maintaining proper decompression protocols even though every instinct was screaming to bolt. But he was trapped in a vertical column now. That's what people don't understand about deep diving. The thing below, the surface 180 feet above, and the middle is where he had to stay because ascending too fast would kill him just as dead as whatever was coming up from below. You're locked into a specific ascent rate, specific stops at specific depths. The math is precise and completely unforgiving. When it stopped about 30 feet below him, Robert got his first clear look at the thing. 20 feet across, roughly, hard to judge exact size because the edges weren't defined the way normal objects are defined in water. It was geometric, composed of shifting angles and planes, like watching a Rubik's Cube solve itself while melting. That's the only comparison he could make later when trying to explain it. The surface was organic, but clearly not biological, not alive in any way he understood life. It moved but didn't swim, didn't propel itself the way sea creatures do, didn't use fins or tentacles or jet propulsion. It had protrusions that looked like limbs or tentacles, except they didn't paddle or push against the water. They just existed in different configurations. The thing would just stop being in one location and start being in another without crossing the space between. No transition, no movement. Just instantaneous repositioning, like it was editing reality, deleting itself from point A and pasting itself at point B. Robert kept his dive light on it, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to fit it into any category of known phenomena. That's when he realized it had a face or something serving the function of a face. Not eyes, no traditional features, no mouth or nose, or any recognizable structure. Just a smooth, reflective surface that somehow conveyed awareness, intelligence, recognition, like it was looking back at him through the surface of its own body. And that's when Robert understood something that shattered his entire sense of reality, his entire understanding of what was possible. This thing knew who he was, not just knew he was there, knew him specifically, individually. Like it had been studying his file, learning his patterns, observing his behavior, waiting for the right moment. The information hit without sound, no voice, no words, no auditory component at all. Just images appearing directly in his mind, like files being uploaded into his brain, like someone had connected a cable and was transferring data. First image was the pipeline he'd been inspecting, viewed from underneath, from the perspective of something that had been down in the trench watching him work for the past 20 minutes. Second image was the support vessel on the surface. Exact configuration, crane positions, lifeboat placements, details Robert had never consciously memorized, but this thing had cataloged perfectly. It knew the layout better than he did, had observed from below, had mapped every detail. Third image was crew members' faces and names, people Robert barely knew, people he'd passed in hallways or seen in the mess hall but never really interacted with. Johnson, the guy who called in sick, Peters, who was supposedly on leave, the captain, the engineers, the deck crew, maintenance staff, even the cook. This thing knew all of them, had observed them, categorized them, learned their routines and behaviors. Fourth image, and this is where Robert's mind started breaking. This is where the real horror set in, himself. Viewed from below during previous dives, multiple angles, different days, different depths. Like this thing had been filming him for weeks without him knowing, collecting footage, studying his movements. Robert had been having nightmares for the past month, waking up at 3 a.m., feeling like he was drowning, seeing shadows in his peripheral vision when he was alone, feeling watched in the shower in his bunk, walking the corridors. He thought it was stress, occupational hazard of deep-sea work, the isolation and pressure getting to him. Happens to a lot of divers, the psychological toll of spending so much time in an alien environment. It wasn't stress, it wasn't his imagination. He was being observed, studied, prepared, selected. The thing had been watching the entire rig, cataloging the crew, learning who was vulnerable, who was resistant, who would be easiest to take. And Robert was on the list, had been on it for weeks. Then the pull started, not physical, mental, this overwhelming urge to descend, to swim down toward the light, to get closer, to see what would happen if he just let go and sank. His rational mind was screaming to ascend, get to the surface, get away, follow training and protocols. But another part of his brain, something that didn't feel like his own thoughts, was whispering that going down would be okay, would be better than okay, would be peaceful, would answer questions he didn't even know he had. Robert grabbed the pipeline with both hands to stop himself from descending, locked his grip, used the structure to anchor himself against the compulsion. His body wanted to go down, his training was screaming to go up, and he was stuck in the middle fighting himself. Fighting his own impulses, fighting thoughts that felt alien, fighting the overwhelming sense that surrender would be easier than resistance. He had decompression stops to make. At 180 feet, you can't just shoot to the surface. The nitrogen in your bloodstream needs time to off-gas. You have to stop at specific depths for specific durations, 15 feet for 3 minutes, 10 feet for 5 minutes. The math is precise and completely unforgiving. Violate the schedule and you get the bends, nitrogen bubbles forming in your joints, your spine, your brain. The thing mirrored his ascent. When Robert stopped at his first decompression point, it rose and stopped 30 feet below him, maintaining exact distance. When he moved to the next stop, it followed, pacing him perfectly, staying close enough to maintain whatever connection it had established but not approaching further, not closing the distance. It was patient, calculated, like it understood the decompression requirements, like it knew Robert was trapped in the protocols and couldn't escape quickly. And the whole time, images kept flowing into his mind. The rig from below, perspectives he'd never seen, the crew sleeping in their bunks, people in private moments. This thing had been observing everything, learning routines, studying behaviors, mapping the entire social structure of the 47 people living on that platform. Robert realized what it was doing. The strategy became clear: not hunting, recruiting, harvesting, selecting specific individuals, and preparing them psychologically. The hypnotic pull got stronger at each decompression stop. His hands were shaking on the pipeline, physical exhaustion mixing with mental invasion. Part of him genuinely wanted to let go, to sink back down, to see what would happen if he just surrendered to whatever this thing was offering. That's when he thought about Johnson, really thought about him. Johnson had mentioned dreams a few weeks back, sitting in the mess hall over coffee, half joking about it. Keep seeing the rig from underneath like I'm swimming below it, seeing all of you from below. Weird, right? Everybody laughed it off. Diving does strange things to your subconscious, plays with your dreams, nothing unusual. Except it wasn't Johnson's subconscious, wasn't random dream imagery. It was preparation, mental conditioning, the entity planting images, creating familiarity with the underwater perspective, making the idea of being below the rig, of swimming in deep water, seem normal, comfortable, appealing. The thing was working on them gradually over weeks, maybe months. Dreams first, planting images, creating familiarity, then paranoia, making them aware of being watched, softening their psychological defenses, isolating them mentally from the crew. Then the feeling of separation, of not belonging, of being different, of having a connection to something the others didn't understand. Then the water calls and they walk in voluntarily, believing it's their choice. Johnson didn't have food poisoning. Johnson heard the call and answered it. Peters didn't take emergency leave. Peters heard it and went. The two maintenance divers didn't transfer to another rig. They heard it and walked into the ocean. 4 men in 3 months, all explained away with paperwork. Nobody questioned. Plausible reasons that made sense on the surface. Robert was fighting it now, fighting the same call they'd answered, resisting the compulsion that had taken 4 others. The difference was Robert had pulled bodies out of entanglements, had seen what death underwater actually looked like, had looked into dead eyes, had felt the weight of drowned men, had nightmares about those rescues for months afterward. Maybe that made him resistant, maybe seeing too much horror built up immunity to whatever this thing was broadcasting. He doesn't know why he could resist when others couldn't, doesn't know what made him different. Maybe it was the rescue training, maybe it was something in his psychology, maybe he just got lucky. But he held on, fought through the decompression stops, maintained discipline even while his mind was being invaded. At 1634, he broke the surface, emerged into air and sunlight, back in the normal world. The thing didn't follow, didn't pursue him to the surface. It descended back to the trench, the blue-green glow fading into deep water, retreating to whatever depth it normally inhabited. Robert watched it go, and that's what terrified him most. That's the detail that broke something in his understanding. It let him go, deliberately released him. Not escape, not evasion, release, intentional, with purpose. Like it was done with him, like he'd served whatever function it needed, like sending him back was part of the plan. Deck crew pulled him up, grabbed the umbilical, hauled him onto the platform, standard recovery procedure, removed his helmet, checked his vitals, started asking questions. First words out of Robert's mouth, "Where's Johnson?" Captain Reeves said, "Johnson's in his quarters, food poisoning, remember?" Standard answer, nobody had any reason to question it. Robert said, "Check right now, physically check." The tone in his voice made Reeves move. Something absolutely certain, absolutely urgent. They checked Johnson's quarters, door unlocked, room empty, bed made, sheets tucked, looked like nobody had slept there. Personal effects still present, wallet, phone, civilian clothes, everything you'd take if you were actually leaving. But dive gear missing, wetsuit gone, tanks gone, everything you'd need to enter the water.
When did anyone actually see him?
Robert asked, looking at the assembled crew. The question hung there. Nobody wanted to answer because the answer was disturbing. Johnson had called in sick at 06 over the radio, voice transmission from his quarters. Nobody had physically laid eyes on him since dinner the night before, 18 hours ago. They'd all assumed he was in his quarters recovering, standard food poisoning protocol, isolate and rest. Nobody checked, nobody verified. Why would they? Robert said, "Check Peters," voice flat, already knowing what they'd find. Peters was officially on emergency leave, family emergency, supposedly took the supply boat to the mainland 3 days ago, except when they pulled the supply boat manifest, Peters wasn't on it, never boarded. The boat captain confirmed when contacted, never saw Peters, didn't load his gear, no record of him. Peters' room was empty, same pattern, personal effects present, dive gear missing. Robert said, who else has left recently? They found 2 more maintenance divers, both logged as transferred to another rig for a contract extension, except when they contacted corporate, no transfer orders on file, no record of the request, no paperwork authorizing the move. Rooms empty, gear missing, last seen days ago. 5 missing divers in 3 months, all with explanations that made sense individually but collectively painted a nightmare scenario. Nobody quits offshore work by just walking away. It's too remote, too documented, too controlled. You can't just leave. There's paperwork, flight manifests, boat schedules, security protocols. Unless you walk into the ocean, unless you're called by something that's been preparing you for weeks. Robert told Captain Reeves everything. The light, the entity, the geometric shape, the telepathic images, the hypnotic pull. Laid it all out in clinical detail, maintained calm professional tone, presented it like a dive incident report. Reeves thought he was having a breakdown, nitrogen narcosis delayed somehow, psychological break from the isolation and stress. Robert said it's been working on all of us, the dreams, the paranoia, the feeling of being watched. We're all being prepared. Everyone on this rig has been exposed. Reeves didn't believe him, couldn't believe him. The implications were too massive. But he checked his own quarters anyway, because something in Robert's voice was absolutely certain, absolutely unshakable. Reeves had been having dreams too, hadn't mentioned them to anyone because command doesn't admit to psychological issues. The rig from below, swimming underneath the platform, geometric lights in the distance, feeling peaceful about it. So had the chief engineer, so had the deck supervisor, so had most of the senior staff. 47 people on that rig, and when they actually started talking about it, comparing notes, at least 30 of them had been having similar dreams, same imagery, same perspective, same feeling of being called. Robert said, "We need to evacuate now, everyone off this rig within 24 hours. Reeves made the call, emergency evacuation, skeleton crew only, everybody else off the platform. Corporate pushback was immediate. Evacuations are expensive, require justification, paperwork, explanations. Reeves cited safety concerns, potential psychological contamination, recommended full crew rotation. Robert didn't wait 24 hours, refused to spend another night on that rig. He was airlifted at 17:20, helicopter pulling him off the deck, emergency medical transport. As they gained altitude, he looked down at the water below the rig, saw something that confirmed everything. Faint blue-green glow, rising toward the surface, moving toward where the crew was still working, where people were still vulnerable. It wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't staying in the deep trench. The Poseidon rig maintained skeleton operations, kept running with minimal staff. Corporate couldn't afford to shut down completely. Sector 7 was officially closed for maintenance indefinitely, no timeline for reopening. Over the next 6 months, 3 more drownings, all ruled accidental by official investigation. All bodies recovered wearing dive gear, all found in the Sector 7 area, all experienced divers who should have known better. Robert Kensington relocated to Nevada, bought a house in the desert, as far from the ocean as you can get in the continental U.S. His diving career was over, 8 years of perfect record, ended in 2 hours, 6-figure salary gone, entire professional identity erased. He filed for PTSD compensation, detailed the incident, provided testimony, submitted to psychological evaluation. Insurance denied it, said his claims were unsubstantiated, no physical evidence, no corroborating witnesses. Poseidon Industries offered a settlement, small payout plus an NDA, take it or fight it in court for years. He took it, signed the paperwork, and disappeared from the industry. But the dreams never stopped, got worse, if anything, more vivid, more detailed. He still sees rising water in the desert, wakes up convinced his house is flooding, sees geometric lights in swimming pools, can't go near reflective water, sees Johnson and Peters alive but different, transformed somehow, integrated into something else. Their bodies changed, adapted to deep water, but their faces still recognizable, still aware, still calling to him, showing him what they've become, showing him that it's not death, it's transformation. Robert won't shower with his eyes closed anymore, won't look at reflective surfaces too long, hears the rhythmic pulse in moments of silence, the same pulse he felt from the entity, the same heartbeat rhythm like it's still connected to him somehow. He said something in his last interview that nobody wanted to publish. I got out, but I don't think I got away. Because here's where this gets wider, where the pattern becomes undeniable. Similar incidents have been documented at North Sea platforms, Gulf of Mexico rigs, South China Sea operations, offshore installations worldwide, always deep water, always experienced divers, always ruled accidental, always the same pattern of willing entry, bodies recovered in dive gear. Families get paid off, records get buried, operations continue. Nobody wants to acknowledge the pattern. Nobody wants to admit that something intelligent is down there, that it's been there the whole time. We've been drilling and building and sending people into its territory. The ocean covers 71% of Earth's surface. We've explored less than 5% of it. The assumption has always been that the unexplored parts are empty, that if something intelligent existed down there, we'd have found it by now. Robert's theory is different. We have found it repeatedly. We just keep explaining it away because acknowledging it would shut down entire industries. Why did the entity let Robert go? That's the question that keeps him up at night. Theory 1, his resistance made him useless, couldn't be controlled, so couldn't be harvested, failed the selection process. Theory 2, he served a purpose, messenger, the thing wanted the surface world aware, wanted people to know something's down there, wanted to send a warning, stay out of deep water, this territory is claimed. But there's a third theory Robert doesn't like to talk about, the one that terrifies him most. The timeline, the pattern of depths. First incidents at these rigs happen at 200 plus feet, deep water, technical diving depths. Recent incidents are happening at 180 feet, shallower, more accessible, closer to recreational diving ranges. What happens when it reaches 100 feet, when it reaches depths that sport divers access, when it reaches shallow water where people swim? The Poseidon rig is still operational, Sector 7 still closed, but everything else running normally. They hire new divers monthly, turnover rate is 40%, nobody asks why, nobody investigates the pattern. No investigation, business continues, production targets met, quarterly reports filed. Robert hasn't touched open water in 3 years, won't go near it. Panic attacks if he sees the ocean. Johnson and Peters are still listed as missing, no bodies, no closure for their families, no answers. The entity beneath Sector 7 has never been documented officially, exists only in one diver's testimony that nobody believed. One emergency evacuation that got written off as precautionary, one settlement agreement with an NDA attached. Think about what Robert said. I don't think it was hunting, I think it was recruiting. Recruiting for what? Building what? Preparing for what? Johnson and Peters aren't dead according to Robert's dreams. They're down there, changed, waiting. And every night, Robert says they called to him, show him what they've become. Show him that it's not death, it's transformation, integration into something that's been in the deep water since before we ever built the first rig. The ocean isn't empty, it's occupied. And we've been trespassing, drilling into territory that belongs to something else, sending people into waters where they're being observed, cataloged, selected. What's down there in the other 95% we haven't explored? What's watching us from depths we can't reach? What's waiting for us to come deeper?